Welcome back to The Oracle. I'm Max Keiser with Stacy, Herbert, Richard Stephenson, and Alison Smale, executive editor of the International Herald Tribune. Welcome, Alison.
Hello.
As the West bails out its bankers, Latin American leaders met in Belém, Brazil, at the World Social Forum to start creating a new social capitalism in which bankers would no longer sponge off the state and global leaders are permitted to wear many, many more colors. Stacy.
If you look at this photo, this is the world leaders, well, the Latin American leaders. There's President Lula in the middle, pulling his ears. I think he's taunting the people in Davos, where he was invited but refused to attend, as you see from this headline. Lula shuns Davos, opting to stay in Brazil instead.
Alison, what about this? Lula is shunning the Davos group, the power elite, hanging out with the social capitalists, whatever that means. What do you read into it?
Well, I mean, first of all, he's true to his roots like that. Secondly, he was able to assemble the leaders of Latin America, who probably have come in for their fair share of derision, or at the very least treatment where they felt like second-class citizens when they had to be bailed out by the United States, by the International Monetary Fund, in earlier financial crises of their own. So it gave him an opportunity to grandstand. It makes him true to his traditions. Lula came from poverty in Brazil. He comes from a strong trade union tradition. And perhaps he felt that he could get more publicity for himself and perhaps his cause and his country by doing that than joining the crowd at Davos. The other side of the coin, though, is at Davos he could have pleaded the case for Brazil to be let into the world's financial and political structures in the way that it has been seeking, and which many people think it should have a seat at the table.
Well, Lula himself says he didn't go to Davos because why would he go to the place to where the people who bankrupted the global economy are hanging out? But there was a threat issued by RBC Capital where they said that Lula has made a grave mistake by not attending Davos, that this is a country, Brazil, that needs to refinance $64 billion in foreign loans in the next year. So do you think going forward that refinancing his state loans, could this be a problem?
Well, money talks. I think politics talk louder, and he's clearly made the calculation that he's going to be in on the world's deliberations. We have a G20 meeting coming up in London. If indeed Brazil gets that much of a seat at the table, and it really seems likely, then presumably Brazil also gets refinancing. I think that the people who are on the retreat right now are unfortunately the market analysts who might think that they can still make such sweeping statements and get away with it.
I think it's got no relevance whatsoever. I think he's made a political move, and that's fine, but it's not going to make any difference to his ability to refinance his debt. I mean, that's business, you know, and that's going to get done.
Now, an interesting result that came out of the World Social Forum was this next headline: protectionism won't solve the crisis.
Well, I mean, I think protectionism is not a good answer, particularly if we've been sort of the global elite sitting around pontificating about globalization for the last decade or so. But protectionism is awfully hard to stop because governments, if indeed that's the sort of the new salvation is governments, they have to win elections in most parts of the world. And even if they don't have to win elections, let's say China, or arguably perhaps Russia, you still do have to maintain enough of the popular goodwill to govern. And what is clearly going to happen with these colossal staggering figures in unemployment and layoffs that we're seeing in big places like China is that the governments are going to struggle to maintain stability. I think when you're struggling to maintain stability as a government, you turn to whatever tool you need in order to hang on. And it may well be protectionism.
So the globalization movement or capitalism, hyper-capitalism is great on the way up, but we don't like it on the way down. It seems to be the message we hear from some people.
Does anybody like anything on the way down?
Well, I mean, but I think a true entrepreneur and a true capitalist would, you know, take his lumps, let things fail, and start over again. This idea of let's go to capitalist route on the way up, and then on the way down, let's socialize the risk while privatizing the rewards. That's the worst of both systems. It's the worst of capitalism. It's the worst of socialism. Yeah. You know, I've heard enough. You know, we got to consult the Oracle and see what she's all about. Here's what she says. Number one, Brazil is going to refinance $64 billion through oxygen futures. Oxygen futures. That's right. Something like 20% of the world's oxygen comes from Brazil. They're going to sell like those carbon futures, except it's going to be oxygen futures. All right, number 2. The U.S. rejects IMF advice on economy. It's an identity crisis because the IMF is the U.S. It's like that movie. What's that movie where he stabs his mother? You know, Alfred Hitchcock. Psycho. It's Psycho.